All right, so this is going to be our first set of notes in APES this year. And I'm really excited because I'm trying something new. We're gonna be doing sticky notes. Sticky notes, just to do a real quick explanation, sticky notes are essentially notes that will cover some of the highlights of the unit, but definitely not the entire unit. And so, and not even an entire section. It's only gonna cover the highlights. So in no way do sticky notes actually replace reading the textbook. You will need to read the textbook. You'll need to take notes on the textbook using the notes frame sheets that I gave you on the first day of each unit. And then I will go over either difficult concepts or things that I want to note, or concepts that I want to make sure that you understand. And so I will hit some highlights of the unit, but again, not the entire unit. So let's go ahead and talk about what we're going to find in Unit 1. Unit 1 is all about the living world, ecosystems specifically. And so in the living world, how do the biotic, which are the living factors in an ecosystem, and the abiotic, the non-living factors of an ecosystem, how do those interact? And then we're also going to be looking at terrestrial and aquatic biomes, the biogeochemical cycles, how plants get their energy and what they do with that energy, and then also trophic levels, energy, how energy flows through a food chain, and then food chains and food webs. So that'll be pretty much what this unit is all about. Okay, so starting off with our first set of sticky notes for Module 1, Introduction to Ecosystems, I wanted to first point out some information that was in this case study, Growing Grapes to Make Fine Wines. I really like the case studies in APES because on the AP test, I don't remember the exact percentage, but it's a large percentage of the test that covers ecological issues or situations, and then how do we as humans either impact those situations and what can we do to find solutions to those situations. So I like the case studies because they really talk about those environmental situations or conditions. All right, so starting off with growing grapes to make fine wines. When you read about this, you should have seen that grapes grow under a narrow range of climate conditions. So grapes tend to grow anywhere between 30 and 50 degrees latitude, either north of the equator or south of the equator. They tend to also be very close to the ocean because there needs to be a certain amount of humidity that the grapes grow well under. They tend to be on western sides of the continent. They have similar air current patterns that they grow best in, as well as certain water current patterns or conditions. And they all tend to be in a biome that has similar types of plant species. So grapes, because of their requirements, grow well in these conditions, and we find that throughout the world actually. So when we talk about areas where grapes grow well, we're talking about California, Italy, Spain, Australia, Argentina. So those are various places throughout the world where we get very fine wines because the grapes grow so well. And something else that's important to note here is that the environmental situation that surrounds growing grapes is that climate change is actually causing wine regions around the world to shift more northward. So as the temperature gets hotter, the air currents, the water currents, the temperature, the amount of rainfall that's happening is all being forced northward. Everything's shifting. And so what we're finding is that by 2040, where they grow grapes right now, if conditions continue as they are, we may not find grapes. It won't be as well suited to growing grapes as it is right now. So that's not very far away. So that's just a few years. All right. Something else to note from this section was that different areas, this is just a common theme that we find throughout APES, that different areas have distinct climates that determine, and it also impacts the species that live there. Okay, so organisms that live in an area are all dependent on that climate, whether that be plants or animals, either one. And then as climate change happens, this impacts the organisms that live there and how they actually use the land and the environment where they live. So as things heat up and the climate changes, the amount of precipitation changes, the temperatures change throughout the year, whether it's cooler in the winter or warmer in the winter because of climate change, or warmer in the summer, I mean, because of climate change, that all is going to be impacting those plant and animal species and even microbial species that live in the area. All right, so now we're jumping into Module 1. That was it for the case study. That was sort of the main things that I wanted to talk about. A lot of what they're talking about in this case study, we're going to cover throughout the unit. So that's one example of this environmental condition that's like a theme that we're going to carry through this whole unit. All right, so looking at Module 1, which is the Introduction to Ecosystems, we understand that all ecosystems are made up of both the abiotic, the non-living factors, and the biotic factors that are found there, okay? So that's a really important concept that's in that first section here that you should have read. We can also, I'll just kind of go back here and explain. Definitely make sure you're looking at these questions and also look at these vocab words that are in the textbook. This is a very good AP book. It's easy to read. A lot of my students preferred reading it last year. They preferred reading the textbook to doing notes. That's why we're doing a lot more textbook reading this year. And the textbook does a good job of covering everything that you need to know for the test. So also make sure, they always highlight these vocab words, so make sure that you understand the vocab words. And I would also read all of the images they have, because they give you lots of examples of things that happen in, like the content, and they give you examples of the content that they're covering. So those are all very good things. All right, so the main theme of Module 1 is species interactions. So how do organisms interact with one another? And so there's 5 types of species interactions that you need to make sure that you understand. You've probably heard of these terms before, so this should be fairly simple concepts that you need to know. But the first one is competition. And then the second, predation. And then we have 3 forms of symbiosis. We have parasitism, which is a parasite, mutualism, and commensalism. All right, so make sure that you know all 5 of these types of interactions and what happens to each of the different species that are involved in that interaction. All right, so talking about competition, there were some important terms here. We have competition, first of all, is one important term, but we also have resource partitioning. Competition actually leads to resource partitioning. And this is because when 2 species are competing, neither one of those species benefits from this situation. Each species is impacted negatively. And that doesn't mean, because some of my students ask me, but if 2 species are competing for something like food or territory or like a mate even, sometimes one species wins out. That can be true in just like a physical combat, but somebody does win out. But there's been so much energy that's been spent in that physical competition that actually that species is being harmed as well, even if they end up quote unquote winning. Anyway, with this resource partitioning, that's when a resource is divided based on behavior or morphology. Now, morphology is a word that I have seen on various test questions. Morphology just means body structures. So if you see that word, it's just, what is the physical structure? It could be internal, external, microscopic or not, but it's the structure within the body. And so something that I wanted to point out here was figure 1.5, which is all about Darwin's finches on the Galapagos Islands. This is a prime example of morphological resource partitioning. Essentially, if you read this, what it says is that these organisms were competing for food, so they actually stopped. Well, I guess I shouldn't say stop, but over time, those different species of birds developed different types of beak structures, so their morphology changed, the beak structure changed, so that they were better suited to eat various types of food. whether that be hard seeds and they had thicker beaks like this finch here, or maybe they fed on insects and had like a longer, more of a like a woodpecker type of a beak. And so that's what happened. They divided up their habitat so that they reduced the amount of competition due to resource partitioning. And as a result of that, over time, they developed different morphological structures, their beaks, that allowed them to survive and reproduce. And so that's what happened in this situation with competition. All right, let's move on to predation and parasitism. Predation is basically when species 1 consumes species 2. So in this case, species 1 benefits, species 2 is impacted. And so here we have, like I said, this predation. Make sure that you read about predation and that you understand it. And then with parasitism, I think we all know that parasitism, one species benefits the parasite and another species is harmed, the host organism, whatever that might be. And then the third situation is herbivory. And so herbivory is when the herbivore is the one that's benefiting and the plant that is being eaten is being harmed. Okay, so those are all these three situations are examples of one species benefiting, one species being harmed. All right, moving on, we have mutualism. Mutualism is when both species benefit, and I love these different these are all different examples of the different things that we've talked about here previously, but I love this example of mutualism, talking about acacia trees and ants that have adapted over time so that they both need each other in order to survive. Another example of this would be plants and pollinators. Plants and pollinators are actually one of the most important species interactions on the planet because it's what sustains life on the planet essentially. And just so this was just a cool fact that I saw or I read about when I was reading the book, that there are 900 different fig tree species, and the fig wasps have actually adapted over time. This has been such a close mutualistic relationship that there's almost nearly 900 different types of fig wasps. So I just thought that was really interesting that has happened over time. All right, then there's commensalism. That's when one species is benefiting and one species doesn't really care. This chart is something you need to know. So make sure that you understand this. I would go back and look at this table 1.1. And then the very last thing I want to talk about in this set of notes, this is the last thing I want to talk about here, is what an invasive species is. Invasive species are exotic species that spread rapidly because they have no natural predators in their environment. So they are invader species or exotic species that have been brought to a new area, typically by humans. Sometimes, though, it could even be like ants that are on a branch that blew off of a tree on an island and they sail off to another island and now they're exotic or invader species on a new island. But a lot of times it happens because of humans. Either we've shipped them somewhere, they've been castaways like in shipping containers in China, and then they end up in the southern part of the United States or in South America. So that happens all the time. Examples of this would be rats, zebra mussels, and kudzu. They explain each of these things in the book, so make sure you're reading about those good examples. And then one more thing I want to point out, at the end of each module, there's always practice questions. On your AP test, there's going to be 90 multiple choice questions. So make sure that you can answer these after each section. Just do a real quick check of yourself. If you're not sure about one of these, make sure you're talking to me about it. And then here is a free response question that you can also answer and see if you can identify each of those things. This would be a good thing for you, and hopefully you have a friend in class that you could study with, or even get one of your parents or siblings or someone to quiz you over these questions and just see how you do. Okay, that's it for Module 1. So I will see you all next time with Module 2.